Hi, friend. Welcome to Wild and Waking, a sacred space for the woman unraveling what no longer fits, remembering the truth that's always lived inside her, reclaiming her joy, her voice, her power, and rising fully, fiercely, and without apology. I'm your host, Emily Rushell, and together we'll explore what it means to live in alignment, lead with soul, and awaken a life of abundance, authenticity, and purpose. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to Wild and Waking. I am 7,000 years pregnant. Okay, no, but for real, tomorrow I'm going to be 39 weeks by the time this episode comes out. Goodness gracious, I really hope that there is a baby in my arms. If there's not, I am 11 days overdue or something like that, which would be actually crazy. So feel free to laugh at me if that is the reality, but hopefully not. And I'm just here trying to make it through the day. But today we are on part 2 of our series of diving into the Wild and Waking framework. On our last solo episode, we talked about the unraveling, which is messy and brutal and can be really freaking hard. And today, as promised, we are diving into the next phase of the journey, which is the remembering, which is a phase that can feel so much better, can be enlightening in so many ways, also confusing in so many ways, and honestly can bring up a lot of different emotions. I feel like we'll dive into this, but in many instances, this remembering part of the cycle also brought out some rage in me because it was kind of this feeling of, why did I not know this sooner? Why does everyone not know this? How am I 30-something years old and just accessing this information and just now coming back to this thing that I have always known or should have always known or should have just been part of normal functioning existence, especially as a woman. But for context, as a reminder, the Wild and Waking framework is my signature framework. It is a cyclical map for soul deep transformation. It is not rigid. It is not a one-size-fits-all formula. It is a living, breathing spiral, a rhythm that we move through again and again and again and again in our own unique way. It is not linear. It is not about finishing one phase before going into the next. It is not about checking the boxes. It is not about doing the steps in order. It is learning to recognize where you are right now and honoring that place as sacred. Some days you might feel like you are unraveling and remembering and reclaiming and rising all at once. Other times you might revisit a phase that you thought you'd already moved through. That is the work. That is the journey, my friends. That is how growth actually happens. Each of the 4 phases, the unraveling, the remembering, the reclamation, and the rise, serves as a portal into deeper truth, self-trust, embodiment, and aligned action. These phases are meant to meet us exactly where we are. Again, they're not steps to follow. They are invitations to continue coming home to ourselves. You will know that you are in an unraveling when something feels off and maybe you can't quite name it, or you start digging deeper. The remembering is identified when those whispers of intuition and inner knowing and like aha moments start to tap in. The reclamation is when we choose to do life differently based on what we have moved through. And the rise is when our embodied truth ripples into our leadership, our work, our relationships, and our legacy. This framework is the heartbeat of everything I do and create, whether from group programs to coaching to retreats to community spaces to here on the podcast. It is a sacred scaffolding that holds us while we peel back the layers, reconnect with truth, and rise into the women and leaders and visionaries and voices of tomorrow that we all came here to be. Isn't that wonderful? So, as I said last time, when I reflect back on my own journey, I can absolutely see a multi-year arc of how the Wild and Waking framework, the Wild and Waking journey transpired. But also, we are constantly cycling through these phases on a monthly, on a weekly, or even a daily basis, and sometimes all simultaneously. That's why I say this is nonlinear. It is very cyclical because often we're navigating all of these things at once and sometimes in many different ways, in many different areas of life, in many ideas or belief systems or evolutions of our identity. So, like I said last time, we dug into the unraveling. If you have not heard that episode, I want you to pause this one right here. We will be here when you get back. Go back a few episodes to the last solo episode about the unraveling. But if you are still here, I'm assuming you listened to that. Can you hear how out of breath I am? Oh my gosh. And let's talk about the remembering. Okay. This is the who was I before the world told me who to be. And this shows up in really small, individualized ways, right? Even looking back on my own journey, it was like, who was this little individual soul of Emily before, the conditioning, the rules, the expectations, the guidelines that I absorbed through family, school, church, society, peers, etc. But I also really see this remembering taking place on a big scale right now with especially women as a collective of like, who were we before the onset of all of these forces that dictated the way that we need to show up in the world, that is the expectation that is widely normalized right now. And so I'm going to oscillate between all of that in our time here together because I think it all fits. I think as I have gone through my awakening and my evolution and my, identity and transformation, there are so many pieces of this remembering that have been very deeply personal and also largely collective, which is ultimately what impacts our personal experience. So when I think about the remembering, to compare this to one of the elements, this is the water element to me. It has depth. It has a lot of fluidity. It's rooted in intuition. It's not about becoming someone new. It is coming home to yourself, coming home to this body wisdom, to like the whispers of your inner knowing, that intuitive force. It is like really tapping into and allowing space for your desire, your truth, what makes you feel alive. It is like listening and excavating and like allowing the things to come forward that have always been there. And when I think about the remembering, there's so much of, where this showed up early in my journey that was even just unearthing the parts of myself beneath like obligations and expectations and shoulds. If we reel back to Emily 2019, 2020, 2021-ish, a lot of the way the remembering was showing up was really challenging and debunking these rules that I had around my body, the way that I mother, like what life and work has to look like, right? Like we talk about the stepping outside of the shoulds and letting go of other people's expectations. And gosh, the complex I had around whether or not it made me a bad mom and wife to hire someone to come clean my house. Like, do you remember when that was a thing? And now my gal, I love her so much. She was here this morning and I was like so happily delighted to be down in my office working while she was doing all of those things. But when I made that decision at the time, it was such a like mind obstacle to navigate. Another early instance of this remembering that I can think of that I'll never forget. I was sitting on the floor of my son's bedroom, which was my podcast studio at the time. Started in his closet, and then we had to rearrange his closet. So I'm sitting on the floor and I'm talking to, I feel like Dawn Marie and Jada Dobesh were some of the first people I had this conversation with, where it was even just understanding the parts of my cycle, which now is like so second nature. We talk about the seasonality and cyclical living of being like a woman, much less, a woman who's like tapped into the moon and things like that. But at the time, I was like, what do you mean there are 4 phases of my cycle? Like, I had heard people talk about ovulation. I thought that was just something you had to care about if you were trying to get pregnant. It was not until after my second child was already born that I even knew anything related to what was going on in my own body. And this is what I mean when I say, like, it was rage-inducing to be like, I am in my late 20s, early 30s, and I am just now learning on the very basic level what is happening in not only my body, but like the bodies of everyone that I know. Like, how was the extent to my feminine cycle education just about like how to put a tampon in, and that I could expect to be kind of crabby before my period showed up? What? Like, no wonder I got pregnant without knowing how any of this worked. Like, that was insane to me. How physically disconnected I was from this like internal system that literally dictates the way I feel and experience the world every single freaking day. And that's not even getting into the conversation around hormones or anything like that. Yeah, you hear people say, oh my gosh, she's hormonal. But like, I could not have named one if you had given me $100 to do it. And so I feel like this, kind of then led to my functional health journey. I just had this feeling of like, I don't feel right and I don't know why. And through the nudging of, I don't know, I guess people I was following or something, I started working with a functional health practitioner, found out I was massively deficient in some key like vitamins. I had basically no progesterone in my body. It is not shocking that as soon as I got this all leveled out, I unexpectedly got pregnant the next month. Like, just even sitting down in a conversation with a practitioner whose goal was not to like solve a problem with like a Band-Aid solution, but was like, let's get to the root of like the total picture of your health from every angle. And let's see what's going on here so that you can feel your best. Because I believe you when you say that you feel sad and crazy, right? Because by all other metrics, had I gone to like a general practice doctor, I have no doubt that any conversation we would have had would have been like, yep, this is normal. This is fine. Everything is fine. And reader, it was not fine. Listener, it was not fine, right? And this was years ago. And that's not even the extent to which I started tapping into, my mental health and, began my therapy journey, finding out getting diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety that I had had my whole life. Like, what? Right? All of these ways that I thought that I was broken or I was holding myself to a standard that I was seeing elsewhere and no actual functional awareness of the way my brain or my body worked or experienced the world. And then from there, just starting to learn more about our bodies and the way our bodies hold trauma and, how physical symptoms manifest our inner world and, starting to understand energy and then nervous system regulation. Oh my gosh, I remember being on podcast interview with my friend, Sarah Elise Johnson, and she was talking about like nervous system regulation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been talking about half these things for years, just as like go on a walk, get fresh air on your face, like yada, 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 do all these things. Like, you mean to tell me my nervous system has something to do with this? Like, what does that even mean? And you mean that I can like take care of my nervous system and that's going to make a difference with the way I experience the world. Like, what? And then we start getting into conversations around like the way that women systemically have been taught to suppress the way that we are feeling, right? That we should put a smile on our face, that we should do everything we can to please the people around us, to be the good girl, people pleasing, making sure everyone else's needs are taken care of besides ours. And like what it means somatically to actually feel and experience your feelings. And then pairing that along like the journey of parenting and holding space for my kids as they do that, as I'm learning to do that. Whoa, that's really hard. That's really hard. Then I start understanding intuition and all of the ways that I have followed that throughout my life without consciously knowing what I was doing or where it was coming from. And also all of the ways that I hadn't been. All of the nudges that I had been given, all of the ways that I dismissed or bypassed or straight up ignored these signals from my gut, from my body, from like, intellectual hits that didn't make any sense. Right? And what does it look like for each individual person, and especially woman, to tap into her own intuition in the way that it shows up? Right? Which then makes me think of human design. Oh my gosh, I hadn't even talked about this. Like discovering the Enneagram in 2019 and then human design in, 21, 22. And then now astrology. And it's like, oh my goodness, the number of times that I have shamed myself or hold myself accountable to some arbitrary standard only to dive into one of these resources and realize, oh my goodness, no, this thing that I do or this thing that I don't do or this way that I move through the world is actually written right here. I don't have to fundamentally change who I am. I just get to understand myself and allow that to be the fullest expression of who I am and how I take up space and how I move through the world. I am not broken for the way that I do this or the way that I want this or the way that I handle this or what my gifts are or what I'm being pulled towards. Like it is literally laid out right here in front of me. And I think about what would it have been like to have this information 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. Now, we can all agree that our paths pan out the way they're meant to. Things find us at the right time. But I'm like, how many freaking years of my life was I chasing someone else's standard? Was I holding myself accountable to someone else's ruler? Was I playing by the rules of someone else's checklist? When like my roadmap was always right here all along. And of course, with any of those tools, you read them, you interpret them, you digest them, take what resonates, leave the rest, right? But like the amount of permission and remembering who the fuck I am and diving into these things and being like, of course. Of course. And like the confidence that has come with being like, this idea didn't come from nowhere. It is literally right here that it is in my human design to be so passionate about this. And just because someone else doesn't understand or it doesn't make sense to them or they're not interested in it doesn't mean that anything's inherently wrong with me. It is my right. It is my role. It is my responsibility to step into this thing because this is how I have been uniquely made. And so not only is it like unraveling and taking apart all this other crap that was never mine to begin with, but it's like remembering who I am in the absence of all of that. It is liberating. It is exciting. It is like the number of ways we try to build our identity around these external forces, right? Career, who we're married to, our kids, what our job title is. And it's like, who are you as you? And so much of this remembering has been like untangling the way that I define worth in the context of someone else, and rebuilding the trust that I am inherently valuable and worthy and I have an identity that is completely mine and mine to own. And so I think, especially for a lot of moms who go through this process, or maybe even are starting to wake up to this process, there's some grief that comes with it. The number of times I've heard a woman say, like, I don't even know what makes me happy. I don't know what brings me joy. I don't know what my hobbies are. I don't know what I'm interested in. I don't know what I like. And that's sad to navigate because it's like, oh my gosh, I have poured myself out so dry for all of these other things that I really do love and that do care about. But like, who am I? I am a whole person who also is blessed to be in relationship and have these beautiful things in my life. But so often that feeling of dissatisfaction or the feeling of not getting to where we want to be or like feeling so frustrated comes from this absence of knowing who we are and being so out of touch of what makes us us, especially outside of the context of someone else. Like if you can't list what makes you happy, your hobbies, what brings you joy, how you want to spend your time that doesn't involve someone else, your kids' soccer games, doing laundry, like your job, this is my invitation to get curious. And that doesn't have to be big things, right? What are the glimmers that make you feel like you? If I gave you 1 hour uninterrupted and you could not do one task for work or for your house or for anyone else in your life, like what would you actually do to use that time to feel fulfilled, to feel nourished, to feel joy? Right. And so part of it is this like coming home to these practices and these ideas and these beliefs of what makes you you. Where do you find your embodiment? How do you follow your intuition? How do you be able to say, wow, that's great for someone else. That's not for me. This is who I am. That makes me think, even just like getting my color and style done through House of Color was such a life-changing piece of this for me. When I look back on myself in like elementary and middle school and probably even early high school, like I was always wearing weird, wacky stuff, bright colors. Like I have just always loved that. And then somewhere along the line in high school and college and post-grad, I absorbed, consciously or unconsciously, this idea that neutrality was better, that black was flattering, and that the absence of personality was safer and more grown up and sophisticated, right? My entire wardrobe became gray, black, navy, maybe olive if I was feeling spicy. Literally 50 shades of gray, right? And when I sat down in Kylie's chair and found out I was a spring, I was like, If you're not familiar with the House of Color system, go look it up right now. But basically, spring is like walking, talking bag of Skittles. Like there is nothing subtle about it. It is the most bright, vibrant, clear version of any color you can think of. And the idea of reevaluating my entire wardrobe for this color palette was like so scary. And then as soon as I started doing it, I was like, oh no, this totally makes sense. This is exactly who I am. Exactly who I am. Even up until that point, the number of times people were like, you are literally sunshine in a bottle. You are like a walking, talking energy drink. Like you just radiate joy. But I was dressing like I was just trying to like blend into the wall. And the full permission that I was able to be given through the gift of color is something I will never take for granted. And then I took it one step further and did style, found out I'm a natural gamine, and gamine is like the quirkiest, weirdest. And I'm like, oh yeah, that tracks. And then as I started to really kind of explore the divine feminine and soften and like loosen my grip on like life and outcomes so much. I started to really play with different textures and patterns and just found so much joy in the playfulness of it all. And it's like, duh. But just even in the way that I was physically presenting myself was so indicative of the way that I was trying to move through the world safely in order to be liked. I've shared this story so many times about how, when Andrew and I bought our house and renovated it in like 2018 and 2019, we nailed the white and gray farmhouse aesthetic. Okay. We were just trying to be good adults. We didn't do it on purpose, but we were just trying to make everything match and like do what was trendy and make it all look good, make it look like a magazine. We nailed it. We nailed it. And then after our house flooded, we were like, why is there no color here? This doesn't even look like ours. It was beautiful. It was aesthetic. But since then, we now have a rich green living room, a wine pink dining room, a beautiful blue mud room. Our bedroom is teal with pink and teal wallpaper. We have wallpaper in every bathroom now. And we're still figuring it out, right? Because it's not as easy as just being like, if everything's white and gray, everything matches. There's been a few decisions that I've made that I'm like, I'm not sure that's my favorite. We got to figure out what to do with this. But we want our house full of our personality. I want to fill it with weird shit from the thrift store and colorful art and things that actually represent our life and family instead of Hobby Lobby signs that everyone else has. Right? But so much of this was possible in giving ourselves permission to be ourselves and have personality and be willing to do it wrong. And that's where so many of us have been tiptoeing through life, trying to create the perception of safety. And I say the perception because we do all these things, whether it's in how we decorate, what we wear, what we're willing to say online, the career moves we're willing to make, the way that we parent, the way that we're in relationship, the things that we say or don't do. We are so afraid of messing up, getting a bad check mark, getting a bad review, getting canceled, getting judged, getting looked down upon, that we have curated this experience of perception based in a perfection that we don't even like. So we wonder why we don't feel fulfilled, why we don't feel lit up, why we don't feel joy, why we don't feel on fire. But it's so much of our reality we have curated through safety or the perception of safety. But real safety comes from when we know, love, and trust ourselves. The world would be a fundamentally different place if every single woman and man fundamentally knew, loved, and trusted themselves. But so many of us, myself included for many years, don't even actually know who we are on a soul level. Don't even like who we are. So much of our decision making is rooted in shame, in self-loathing, in self-deprecation, in punishment, in fear. And this isn't the kind of self-love that's just hashtag self-love, hashtag self-care. This is really, truly loving who you are. Looking in the mirror and loving who you are. Really, truly, not just the good parts, not just the things that are going well, not just the perfect body after hours and hours and hours and hours of sacrifice. Really, truly loving, honoring, accepting, and celebrating the highs and the lows, the wins and the missteps, the pieces that are easy to love and the darkness. That has been my work over the past couple of years, is learning to really sit with and befriend the depths of myself. Because for so many freaking years, I had unknowingly created a personality that kept me safe and successful, right? I was bright and bubbly and sunshiny and happy and confident presenting. And I got praised for that. It worked really well. It was really adaptable for whatever room that I walked into. The way that I carried myself, portrayed myself a certain way. And that piece of me is amazing. And I'm so proud and grateful for her. But to love that version of myself in the same way as I love the dark, the introspective, the quiet, the one who needs solitude, the one who feels rage and anger and frustration, the one who isn't always on it or successful or happy, to equally love, honor, and celebrate all of the pieces of who we are, and then trust ourselves, trust our bodies, trust our intuition, trust our soul guidance, trust our spirit team, trust who we are and how we move through the world. When we genuinely know, love, and trust ourselves, that is when we experience the true joy, content, safety, belonging, and alignment that we crave. And so much of this remembering is rebuilding that. Rebuilding the severed trust that we have with who we actually are. That's what really initiated this whole journey for me, is sitting with hundreds of women who are so smart, so passionate, so brilliant, so beautiful, so impact driven, and watching the way that at their core, they were drowning in expectations, in self-loathing, in severed self-trust. And it was manifesting as lack of confidence or imposter syndrome, when really it was just this very intentional severance from themselves. And I don't want you to absorb this as a something's wrong with me problem. How could I be so disconnected from myself? Because this is systemic, and this is part of the remembering for me. A huge part of the remembering for me, especially over the last year, is really peeling back the layers of like, how the fuck did we get here? And it is intertangled in more systems than we could count. Like the overlap between patriarchy, capitalism, colonization, the church as an institution, it is like a complete circle, y'all. Okay? In the way these systems of power and structure have intentionally and systemically, over the courses of thousands of years, in big ways and in micro ways, disconnected, especially women, but men are not excluded from this, but especially women from themselves and from their power, because women are the creators. We are the seers, we are the knowers, we are the doers, we are the protectors. We are so in tune and tapped in to the creation of life, to the spiritual realm, to everything. And when a woman is in touch with her power, she is a threat to these systems and structures that have been built to suppress her. And so part of this remembering on a systemic level for me over the past year has been understanding this, like reading Mary Magdalene Revealed. I know I've talked about that book 7,000 times. So it was like answering questions I didn't even know that I was asking, right? Understanding the seasonal, cyclical nature of the way that we relate to the elements, to the moon, to the world around us. Huge part of remembering. And even just starting to understand some of these more, like even just things like Reiki, like different types of healing have been like, oh, this feels so natural and like it's been a part of me all along. And it was just waiting for me to say yes, right? So many practitioners and healers and mediums that have come into not even just my space, your space too. They've been on the podcast this year, and just like hearing the things that they say and be like, yep, that makes sense. How did I not know this before? It's all a part of it. The remembering is, who was I before the world told me to be? Like water, this phase is fluid. It is deep. It asks us to soften, to flow inward, and return to the source of who we have always been. Water holds memory. That's a Frozen reference for you. And so does your body, your intuition, and your soul. Here, you listen to the whispers, You follow the current of your truth and let it carry you home. This is where you return to yourself. Beneath the noise of expectations and the weight of conditioning, there is a deeper knowing that has always been there, waiting to be heard. The remembering is coming back to that knowing. We turn inward. We get curious about what our bodies are saying, about what lights us up and what drains us. We notice the whispers that keep coming back again and again, the ones we have been taught over time to ignore. We reclaim our intuition as the most sacred data. We practice listening before we leap. Again, this is not about becoming someone new. It's about peeling back the layers until you meet the version of yourself who was never lost, only buried. It's about rediscovering desires you silence, truth you abandoned, and the dreams that you were told were too much. It is about trusting your inner compass and that you have always known the way. So, some questions you may want to sit with as you are in a remembering phase of your journey today or over the arc of time is, what whispers or nudges keep coming back to you when you get quiet? For me, this is like right before I fall asleep, right when I'm like, when you first wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning, when you're kind of in this liminal space, like what's popping in? What does your body say yes or no to? And taking that pause to listen and honor it in big ways and in small ways. I know that you know a time that you have had a full body yes, and I know a time that you have had a full body no, and you've done it anyway. Where are you listening to your body? What practices or rituals or rhythms reconnect you to yourself? If no one was watching and you had no prior obligations or expectations on the calendar today, how would you spend your time? What parts of yourself have you silenced to stay safe? And what would it feel like to give them a voice? What ideas, curiosities, or passions feel a little out there, a little weird, a little stretching, a little wrong? And what if they were actually safe? What if they were sacred? Where do you feel the pull of something bigger, something grander, something more mystical, something that doesn't make sense? What truths are you starting to know deep down, but haven't given yourself permission to trust? Right? I've been seeing this show up a lot, especially in my coven group, for women who are just kind of starting to explore new ideas. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with this. This feels so right. I'm so curious, but there's part of me in the back of my mind that tells me this is wrong. And I'm aware enough to know that that is some conditioning that came from my mom, or came from the church, or came from a teacher, or came from X, Y, and Z. They're like, I just don't think that it's wrong. I don't actually think that it's evil. It doesn't actually make sense that it's bad. But I'm really wrestling with letting myself lean in and explore, rubbing up against this piece of me that feels shame around it. And that's hard. It's really hard to navigate, my friends. So I want to remind you that as you remember, there will be things that brush up against the edge of your comfort zone. And part of the process is leaning into, does this feel uncomfortable because it is not for me and it is not for my higher good? And I intuitively know that this is not the path to walk down. Or is this making me feel uncomfortable because a level of conditioning, expectations, rules, and obligations is overriding what I know to be my path? And that's not always a clear answer. And you don't have to act on it this very second, right? My invitation always is to get curious, is to approach any element of growth, self-discovery, new ideas with an open heart and an open mind. and to always trust that the right thing is going to find you at the right time. We are not in any rush here, right? And there's no level of perfection required. There's no level of mastery you have to hit in order to lean in, right? This is all giving yourself the space and permission to get curious, to peel back layers, and to play, to just play, try something out, dabble a little bit. If it's right, it'll keep feeling right. If it's not, that's okay. Move on. Oh my gosh, there's like so many things in the world to learn and unpack and do and understand. Just because I really love a book does not mean it's going to resonate with you. Just because someone else you know is really digging into an idea doesn't mean it's for you or for you right now. I think about the things that I read and that I do and that I understand and the conversations I participate in today in real time would have felt so foreign 5 years ago. It just means that they weren't meant for my path in that moment. That is the beauty of the Wild and Waking framework, is that it meets you where you are at today, right? And God, universe, source willing, you have so many decades on this planet to navigate this journey. There is no element of perfection or expectation, because I truly believe that what is meant for you will never miss you. And you are right on time. So if you loved this episode, if it is resonating, please shoot me a message, share it to your stories, send it to someone in your circle who might want to hear more about it too. We will be back in a few weeks with the next phase of the journey, which is the reclamation, which has so much energy behind it. I'm so excited to dive into that. And then, of course, we'll wrap up this series with the rise. And as I said, this is really the heartbeat of all of the work that I'm doing in the world right now in this season. So if this is a journey that you would love to be supported in, let's talk about what those conversations would be like on a one-on-one basis, or even getting integrated in some upcoming group programs and retreats that I have in the works for 2026 and beyond. But for right now, I am probably snuggling a little tiny human. Stay tuned on stories to catch a glimpse of her. And until next time, I am seriously so forever grateful for you. Hey friend, I hope this conversation sparked something real in you. Something that feels like truth, curiosity, or the courage to keep becoming. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to share it. Take a screenshot, post it to your stories, or send it to one of your friends. You can always find me over on Instagram at Emily Rushel, where I love continuing these conversations and hearing your takeaways. Truly, your DMs are one of my favorite parts of podcasting, so don't be shy. I'd love to reflect and connect with you over there. I'm so grateful to be surrounded by a community of women who ask hard questions, sit in the discomfort of the unknown, blaze new paths forward, and ultimately come home to their wild and waking selves. See you next week.